A shell tears into the frozen earth 30 yards from the hangar, sending a black column of dirt geysering into the air. The shockwave slams State Security Captain Elizarov against the shredded armor of a Soviet BT-7 tank. Mud splatters his face. October 1941, the outskirts of Moscow. The front is fracturing and crumbling, the defensive line utterly crushed by German tracks. Senior Sergeant Levchenko manages to stay on his feet, his grease-stained hands locked onto the edge of the engine compartment. The light tank's rear is distended, the armor plates warped unnaturally outward. The factory geometry has been butchered by a blowtorch. The tank looks like a gutted iron corpse. Elizarov shakes clumps of damp earth from his wool greatcoat. His right hand drops habitually to his holster. Clutched in his left is a damp, yellowed form. A death warrant. Article 58. Execution by firing squad. The charge, sabotage and the intentional destruction of military equipment in a combat zone. Levchenko isn't looking at the secret policeman. He is staring at the severed bulkhead. Thick armor steel has been sawn off at the base. The hull's structural integrity is gone. The tank has lost its critical protection. "You're facing a tribunal, Sergeant," Elizarov says, his voice dry. He struggles to speak over the ringing in his ears from the nearby blast. "I'll go," Levchenko replies, grabbing a heavy steel crowbar. "If I don't get this thing started first." Another high-explosive shell tears a crater behind the remains of the workshop's brick wall. Hot shrapnel shrieks against the cast iron. Elizarov instinctively ducks. Levchenko keeps working. The massive block is jammed against the frame, the dimensions off by 4 centimeters. The mechanic grabs a 16-pound sledgehammer. He swings. A heavy blow crashes down on the mounting rail. The metal groans in protest. Sparks shower his diesel-soaked coveralls. "Cease this sabotage!" Elizarov whips out his service pistol. The blued steel points directly at the mechanic's chest. "Go ahead and shoot, Captain. But you'll be the one hauling this tank yourself," the sergeant says, tossing the sledgehammer aside. He jams the end of the crowbar under the rail. The muscles in his arms quiver from the extreme strain. His face is gray, masked by ingrained soot and chronic sleep deprivation. The front is in full retreat. Half an hour ago, a scout who'd miraculously survived reported a breakthrough by a German mechanized column. There is no more time. The cold October wind tears at the paper in the officer's hand. The ink bleeds in the icy drizzle. The battalion commander's signature is already there. The captain is duty-bound to carry out the sentence on the spot. The evidence of the crime is undeniable. The mechanic had, on his own authority, cut out a load-bearing armor plate. The roar grows, the monotonous, soul-crushing drone of dozens of heavy engines. The enemy is advancing in a tight wedge, crushing the last scattered infantry screens. The ground begins to vibrate with a fine tremor under their boots. Levchenko throws his entire weight onto the crowbar. Blood oozes heavily from under a torn fingernail. Thick grease mixes with warm ichor on the rusted metal. The mounting rail shifts 2 millimeters with a loud screech. 2 degrees, the mechanic rasps through clenched teeth. "Give me those 2 degrees, or the drive shaft will rip out the second we start it." He isn't begging for mercy. He's demanding technical precision. Elizarov takes a step forward, his index finger resting firmly on the trigger. "You cut the armor plate," the captain says, punctuating every word. "The machine will split at the seams the moment it takes a hit." "It won't make it to the hit," Levchenko snaps, turning sharply. His eyes are sunken. "There's no power. We need the torque."
The piercing howl of a mortar shell throws them both into the cold mud.
The explosion hammers the security positions 100 yards from the shattered hangar. The moans of the wounded are instantly drowned out by the roar of a fresh artillery barrage. The Germans have zeroed in on the grid square. The encirclement is tightening fast. Elizarov is the first to stand. He wipes blood from a split lip with the dirty sleeve. The execution order is gone, lost face down in a puddle forever. "Start it," the captain barks. Levchenko is on the armor in a single leap, his boot soles skidding on spilled oil. He climbs into the tank's gutted vitals. It's unbearably cramped inside. The air is thick with the stench of scorched rubber, burnt metal, and dampness. The space for the massive new engine was bored out by hand with a crooked file. The welds are crude. The entire insane contraption is held together by tightened bolts and steel cables. The state security officer peers into the open hatch. The pistol is still aimed down. "If it stalls, I'm putting a bullet in the back of your head," Elizarov promises. "Hand me the 32mm wrench," Levchenko cuts him off. The captain freezes. Taking orders from a prisoner under investigation is a gross violation of regulations. A fresh volley of German artillery obliterates the roof of a field ammo dump on the next street over. The shockwave slams into their ears. Elizarov bends down, his fingers fumbling in the cold muck for a heavy wrench. The metal is freezing to the touch. The captain thrusts the tool into the darkness of the hatch. Levchenko grabs the wrench. A metallic screech follows. The nut is stubborn, the threads stripped. The mechanic braces his feet against the steel bulkhead and pulls the wrench toward him. A loud crack echoes. The threads give way. "Give me the linkage!" Levchenko shouts from the depths of the cramped compartment. He's working blind, connecting completely incompatible parts by feel. He wedges the massive unit into the compressed space of the engine bay. The clearances are 0. Vibration will destroy these fragile mounts within 10 minutes of active combat. He knows this perfectly well. The ground shakes harder now. Enemy tanks are moving into direct fire positions. An armor-piercing shell shrieks through the brick wall of the boiler room right next to them. Sharp brick shards pepper his face. Thick, acrid dust chokes his lungs. A dry cough tears at his throat. "Time!" the captain screams over the rising roar of the enemy's tank diesels. "Ready!" Levchenko emerges from the hatch, a length of thick wire clutched in his filthy hands. With a sharp motion, he shorts the contacts on the terminals. Silence. Only the clatter of German tracks sounds closer. Death is closing in. The engine is silent. Elizarov slowly raises his pistol. The reprieve is over. "Sabotage," the captain states in an icy tone. The hammer clicks loudly as he cocks the weapon. Levchenko stares at the black muzzle. No fear, only the dull rage of a professional. He punches the armor with all his might, splitting his knuckles. Fresh blood smears the cold metal. "Give me a spark!" the sergeant snarls. He grabs the heavy wrench and slams it with everything he's got against the jammed starter housing. The strike of metal on metal rings louder than a gunshot. The contact inside closes. The steel shudders. 3 days ago, the Moscow black earth had become an inescapable trap. The mud had the density of cement and the viscosity of glue. Lieutenant Gorilov's BT-7 tank had bellied out in the middle of a plowed field. The M17T engine wailed at redline. The motor put out 400 horsepower. In dry weather, that was enough for a fast breakthrough. Now, those horses were mired in the ground's death grip. The tracks spun uselessly with a wild clatter.
The cleats couldn't bite into anything solid. Clay muck had completely jammed the drive wheels. The tank shuddered violently, the transmission groaning under the monstrous pressure.
The gearbox was being pushed to the breaking point. Levchenko lay in a trench flooded with ice water 100 yards back. He watched the combat machine's agony through binoculars. He saw the exhaust pipes spitting blue smoke. The engine was suffocating. Fuel mixture was entering the cylinders, sparks were hitting the plugs, pistons were tearing at metal, but the machine stayed put. The lack of torque turned the high-speed tank into a stationary target. No traction meant death. Physics was working against the crew. 800 yards ahead, a German gunner sat, his eye glued to the optic of his sight. His hands methodically turned the elevation and traverse wheels. The barrel of the PaK-38 anti-tank gun lowered smoothly. 50mm caliber, the perfect distance for a guaranteed penetration of light Soviet armor. Cold calculation, no emotion, just dry ballistics. Crosswind, 3 meters per second. Target stationary. No lead required. The loader slammed an armor-piercing shell into the breech. The block snapped shut with a metallic clang. The gun was ready to fire. The field radio hissed in Levchenko's headset. The airwaves were drowning in static. Through the heavy interference, the distorted voice of the radio operator from Gorelov's tank broke through. "RPMs are dropping. The gearbox is tearing apart. Give me some traction. Push it!" The shout turned into a desperate rasp. "Give us some power! We're burning in place!" The roar of the engine in the background reached a critical pitch. The valves were hammering. The motor was seconds away from seizing. The shot. The flash at the edge of the woods merged with the short whistle of cloven air. The radio exploded with the piercing shriek of rending metal and went instantly silent. The tungsten core slammed into the frontal armor plate. The slug's kinetic energy punched through the steel barrier with ease. The armor's slope meant nothing. The shell overmatched the machine. Red-hot armor fragments fanned out inside. Molten metal shrapnel riddled the crew in a fraction of a second. The engine choked on its own blood. A fragment had severed the main oil line. The motor coughed black smoke and died. An ear-splitting silence followed. The mathematical lack of power had culminated in the geometry of a trap. A perfectly calculated angle of impact multiplied by the target's zero velocity. Levchenko threw himself out of the trench. Filthy water splashed everywhere. He bolted forward, leaping over fresh craters. A German machine gun crew spotted the movement. An MG-34 opened up. Tracers stitched the air right over the mechanic's head. Lead thudded into the soft earth. Clumps of mud pelted his face. Levchenko dropped onto his belly. He crawled, his elbows scraping raw against small stones. Bullets clipped the grass inches from his helmet. He reached the tank's hot rear and scrambled onto the track. The metal burned his hands through his thick canvas mittens. The stench of scorched flesh, burnt rubber, and evaporating diesel hit his nostrils. Levchenko grabbed the handle of the turret hatch and yanked upward. The latch was jammed from the hull's severe deformation. The sergeant braced a heavy boot against the turret. He gritted his teeth and wrenched the scalding metal toward him with a primal grunt. The hatch screeched as it swung back. A thick column of acrid smoke erupted from the open maw. Levchenko held his breath and dove inside. Lieutenant Gorlov lay across the gun breech. A large shell fragment had punched through his chest. Blood pumped in thick spurts onto the ammo rack, drenching the gleaming brass casings. The mechanic grabbed the commander by his leather harness and pulled upward with all his strength. The body was limp, snagging on the traverse gears. With a violent jerk, Levchenko hauled the dead man out of the hatch and shoved him down, straight into the mud.
A long burst from a heavy machine gun stitched the external fuel tanks. Fuel poured onto the armor in a heavy stream. The risk of a fuel-air explosion was now absolute. Levchenko descended back into the hell of the smoke-filled fighting compartment. The gunner was dead. The driver sat in an unnatural pose, his hands locked onto the steel steering levers. His fingers had turned white from a death spasm. Until his final millisecond, he had tried to squeeze non-existent, life-saving RPMs out of the motor. With short, brutal strikes, Levchenko knocked the dead man's hands off the levers and dragged the heavy body out. German mortars began zeroing in on the knocked-out Soviet machine. The first 81mm shell landed 20 yards away. Shrapnel clattered thickly against the armor. Levchenko jumped to the ground. He grabbed the two bodies by the collars of their wool greatcoats and dragged them through the deep tank ruts. The muscles in his back and legs cramped violently. The weight of dead flesh, heavy with autumn water and caked mud, felt impossible. He dragged them 10 yards, 15, 20. He collapsed with them into the bottom of a deep bomb crater. Air whistled from his ragged lungs. Levchenko rolled onto his back. Overhead, another shell wailed and tore into the BT-7's rear. The tank's remains instantly erupted in bright flames. A column of thick, greasy black smoke rose toward the gray sky. The sergeant stared at the fire. His face was covered in a hard crust of mud and someone else's blood. The tank's factory specifications had been the direct cause of these men's deaths. A weak engine had signed their death warrants. The designers in their offices had botched the math. They hadn't accounted for this godforsaken black earth. They hadn't built in a critical reserve of torque. Levchenko looked at his shredded, bloody hands. He wiped the blood from his face. In that moment, grief transformed entirely into a cold engineering problem. This machine had to have a new engine. A motor that would tear through any mud with ease.
A unit that would rip tons of steel out of any tactical trap. An engine that would never stall under crossfire. Those missing RPMs would be found. The price didn't matter. The geometry of the trap would be broken by brute force. The rain lashes down. October water mixes with clay and soaks through his padded jacket. Sergeant Levchenko crawls along the bottom of a deep, washed-out ravine. Shrapnel bursts overhead. German fighters are strafing the square with lead. The air hums with the heavy engines of Messerschmitts. Levchenko presses his face into the cold muck. Tracers mow the dry grass at the ravine's edges. Death walks 1.5 feet away. The sergeant crawls on. The sound of Gorilov's tank armor being shredded still rings in his ears. He needs a rematch. He needs a force capable of breaking the German calculus. A black silhouette emerges from the fog ahead. Twisted metal, the smell of aviation fuel and burnt wiring. A Soviet IL-2 Sturmovik is slammed into the ravine's slope. The armored tub is cracked by a direct hit from an anti-aircraft shell. The tail is ripped off. The left wing has become a broken aluminum skeleton. Levchenko pulls himself up by his hands, sliding on the wet clay. He reaches the nose of the aircraft. The pilot is dead, the cockpit drenched in blood. The sergeant doesn't look at the pilot. The sergeant looks under the torn cowling panels. A beast lies there. A Mikulin AM-38 aircraft engine. A 12-cylinder V-shaped Titan. The embodiment of absolute power. 1,600 horsepower. Triple the traction for his light tank. 4 times what the factory BT-7 had. Engineering genius, encased in steel and aluminum, now slowly sinking into the Moscow mud. Levchenko runs a bloody hand over the cold valve covers. The engine is intact.
The Sturmovik's armor took the hit. The cylinder block isn't breached. The lines aren't severed. This mass of metal physically will not fit into the tank's narrow engine compartment.
The laws of geometry scream that it's impossible. The center of gravity will shift. The transmission will be pulverized by that kind of torque. Levchenko doesn't give a damn about physics. Levchenko pulls a heavy wrench from his boot. The whistle of cloven air hammers his eardrums. A German bomber is coming around for a second pass. The earth heaves from the nearby blast of a 50-kilogram bomb. The shockwave hurls the sergeant against the fuselage. A sharp edge of duralumin slashes his cheek. Blood floods his left eye. The mechanic wipes it away with a filthy sleeve. He grips the wrench. He fits the jaws over the first lock nut, securing the engine to the mount. The metal is seized from the extreme heat and the impact with the ground. The wrench won't budge. Levchenko braces his boots against the hull's jagged armor. He throws his whole weight into it. The muscles in his back strain to the limit. Tendons creak. The nut holds fast. He grabs a heavy stone and slams it with all his might against the wrench handle. Sparks shower the fuel-soaked ground. A strike, another. The threads give with a sharp screech. The mechanic breaks the nut loose. His fingers cramp. There are 11 more mounting points to go. The flak fire intensifies. Shrapnel rattles against the remains of the wings. There's no time for a clean teardown. The front is collapsing. Enemy tanks are breaking through. Levchenko moves to the ignition distribution block. Thin bundles of aviation wiring are interwoven in a complex system. There's no time to untangle the knots. He wraps a thick bundle of copper wires around his forearm. He digs his boots into the cylinder block and yanks back hard. Thick insulation cuts his skin to the bone. Pain stabs through his arm from wrist to shoulder. The terminals pop out of their sockets with a crunch. Levchenko falls onto his back, dragging the engine's uprooted nervous system with him. Copper glints amidst the mud and blood. The electrical schematic has been taken by brute force. Another air attack blankets the ravine. A machine gun burst plows the earth 4 inches from the sergeant's leg. Mud fountains up. Levchenko doesn't hide. He lunges for the fuel rail. The nut is stripped, the wrench jaws slipping over the worn edges. The mechanic grips the metal with his bare hands. His fingers slide in the engine oil. He digs his nails into the gap and rips it toward him. The nail on his index finger tears away from the bed with a sickening snap. Sharp pain stabs his brain. Blood sprays onto the pipes. He doesn't let go. He presses his palm against the mangled finger. The fuel line comes away from the block with a wet squelch. Water is flooding the open cylinders. Levchenko strips the leather jacket off the dead pilot and drapes it over the carburetors. Moisture protection is critical. A single drop of water in the manifold will kill the engine on the first start. The mechanic continues to unscrew the heavy studs. A bolt head snaps. Metal rings. A sharp fragment pierces the canvas of his jacket at the shoulder. A warm trickle runs down his back. Levchenko ignores the wound. He grabs a chisel and sets it against the remains of the stud. A blow from the sledge. The chisel crumbles the cast iron. Another strike. The hammer slips and crushes his knuckles. The sergeant lets out a low growl. He spits mud from his mouth. He grips the tool with his bloody hand. He strikes again. The stud gives way. The roar of engines overhead turns into a piercing shriek. A dive bomber releases its payload. The earth around the ravine stands on end. The shockwave hits the mechanic in the chest, throwing him against the wet metal of the fuselage. The air is knocked out of his lungs. Black circles swim before his eyes. Levchenko rasps, gasping for air thick with cordite and death. He claws at the engine mount. He slowly pushes himself up to his knees. He looks at the freed unit.
a ton of pure iron and hate. This engine will make the BT-7 fly over the trenches, or it will turn the tank into a mass grave the first time they try to move. The choice is made. The first step of this insane symbiosis is complete under a hail of fire. Autumn dictates its own rules. Night has locked the half-destroyed concrete hangar in an icy grip. Outside, a heavy, low drone grows continuously. The tracks of the advancing German tanks are methodically grinding the frozen Moscow soil. The encirclement is tightening fast. Inside the repair bay, it smells of old, used oil, burnt insulation, and hollow despair. Sergeant Levchenko stands over the open engine bay of the BT-7. The original M17 engine has been ripped out by the roots. The winch screeched as it lifted the dead cylinder block. Engine oil drains onto the cracked concrete like thick black blood. The tank is empty. The tank is utterly defenseless against the oncoming battle. Above the hull's rusted socket, the new unit hangs from taut steel chains. The AM-38 aircraft engine. 12 massive cylinders glint dully in the light of the single surviving bulb. A ton of primal mechanical power. 1,600 horsepower. A problem kills all hope. The aviation Titan is 40 centimeters longer than the tank's compartment. The center of gravity will inevitably shift. Factory balancing is impossible. Physics screams total failure. The mechanic ignores the laws of physics. Levchenko grabs a heavy cutting torch. Rubber hoses snake like black serpents toward the peeling carbide and oxygen tanks. "Open the valve," the sergeant says curtly. The young soldier from the repair crew swallows a dry lump in his throat. His filthy hands are shaking. "Commander, that's the main armor bulkhead. It holds the whole hull geometry together. If we cut the load-bearing structure, the tank will fold in half from the first shot. That's Article 58, intentional destruction. Execution without trial." Levchenko grips the brass torch valve tightly.
A German armor-piercing shell will fold it a hell of a lot faster. Open the gas. The shriek of oxygen escaping under immense pressure hammers at frayed nerves. Levchenko strikes a flint. A blue flame erupts with a deafening roar, tearing through the gloom of the bay. The temperature instantly jumps past 1,000 degrees. The sergeant directs the fiery sting at the steel plate. The thick armor yields reluctantly. The metal quickly turns red. It boils, spitting molten droplets in every direction. A shower of white sparks hits the mechanic square in the chest. Droplets of liquid slag burn through the thick canvas of his padded jacket. The smell of scorched cotton and burnt human flesh fills the tank's cramped space. Levchenko doesn't flinch. He presses hard on the oxygen lever. The flame grows even harsher. Millimeter by millimeter, the torch cuts through the machine's structural frame. A capital crime is being committed to the rhythmic accompaniment of the approaching artillery barrage. A spray of sparks falls down onto the diesel-soaked floor. Fire erupts instantly. Yellow tongues of flame rush toward the damaged fuel lines with a low hum. Heavy shells from the ammo rack lie just 1.5 feet from the fire. A detonation won't leave even ashes of the hangar. "Fire!" the soldier screams hysterically, lunging for the exit. Levchenko tosses the running torch aside. There's no time to look for a foam extinguisher. With a sharp motion, the sergeant rips the heavy army greatcoat from his shoulders. He jumps straight into the tank's flaming, cramped vitals. He falls chest first onto the growing fire. He covers the burning metal with the thick wool cloth. He furiously beats the edges of the garment with his fists. The oxygen is cut off. The fire resists desperately. Intense heat sears through his tunic. Levchenko growls low through gritted teeth. He presses down on the coat with his entire body weight.
The flames suffocate with a quiet hiss. Acrid white smoke stings his reddened eyes. The mechanic slowly stands up. His palms are covered in crimson burns. The skin on his left hand has split and is bleeding. "Hand me the sledge," Levchenko rasps. He spits black soot onto the floor with force. The cut didn't go all the way through. The gas tank had treacherously run dry. A thick chunk of the armor bulkhead still hangs by glowing steel bridges. The compartment's width is still critically insufficient. Levchenko grabs the 35-pound sledgehammer. There's no room for a proper swing. The walls of the fighting compartment lock his movements tight. He drops to his knees right on the metal floor, slick with foam and used oil. He grips the slippery wooden handle with his scorched, bloody hands. The first blow slams into his ears with more force than a rifle shot. The cast iron bellows with a low, drawn-out groan. A violent vibration jolts through his arms, rattling his shoulder joints. A second strike. A third. Levchenko swings rhythmically, brutally. He pours every ounce of his hatred for the encroaching death into every swing. Blood from burst blisters slicks the smooth wooden handle. Another near miss from a German high-explosive shell blows out the remaining glass in the hangar's high window frames. Sharp shards rain down like a glass storm onto the sergeant's hunched back. He ignores the pain. The 12th blow. The weld seam snaps with the report of a cannon. The metal ties finally give way. A steel plate weighing nearly 200 pounds crashes down, falling completely out of control. The jagged, white-hot edge of the armor shears into Levchenko's right leg. The crunch of breaking bone rings out clearly through the rising roar of the cannonade. The sergeant collapses heavily onto his side. A muffled, guttural groan escapes his throat. He bites down hard on the filthy sleeve of his tunic. Sharp pain paralyzes his body. His vision tunnels into darkness. The heavy plate has pinned his shin to the ribbed floor. The bone hasn't broken the skin, but the leg is swelling visibly before his eyes. The earth shudders again from a concentrated volley of tank fire. The enemy vanguard has moved into direct fire positions against the battalion. The dry, rhythmic chatter of heavy machine guns is clearly audible. Death stands at the very threshold of the repair bay. Levchenko spits out the chewed fabric of his sleeve. He claws at the edge of the fallen armor plate with bloody, trembling fingers. His muscles are seizing from total exhaustion. He makes an incredible, superhuman effort. He shoves the 100-kilogram slab of death slightly to the side. He wrenches his shattered leg from the steel trap. The mechanic hauls himself up with weakened arms. He struggles to stand on his left leg. His right hangs like a limp rag, barely touching the floor. His face is ashen as hospital chalk, masked by black soot and heavy beads of cold sweat. His gaze is fixed only on the gaping hole of the bored-out compartment. The dimensions finally match. The bloody surgery is complete. "Slack the chain!" He screams upward, his voice cracking into a rasp. "Lower the engine!" A ton of dormant aviation metal descends relentlessly. The taut steel chains of the hoist ring with extreme tension. The links bite into the cast iron teeth of the drum with a crunch. Levchenko hangs his entire body weight on the iron lever of the manual winch. His broken right leg pulses with sharp, jagged pain at every slight movement. Shattered bone grinds against bone. The mechanic shifts all his weight onto his healthy left limb. The AM-38 cylinder block scrapes through the opening widened by the oxyacetylene torch. The tolerances are off. The unit catches on the edges. Metal brutally tears metal. A shower of white sparks rains down onto the tank's oily floor. The engine settles onto the crude steel mounts with a heavy, dull thud.
The BT-7 tank shudders through its entire multi-ton hull. The welds on the mounts groan under the overload. They hold the colossal weight at the very limit of the metal's yield strength. The first stage of the suicidal task is complete. The problem of the mechanical coupling remains. The shaft of the massive aviation giant is completely incompatible with the standard tank transmission. Different engineering standards, different kinematics. Levchenko tosses the winch lever aside. He grabs a massive, grimy gray disc from a filthy workbench, a salvaged clutch basket from a wrecked German prime mover, an alien, enemy part to facilitate a monstrous symbiosis. The flange mounting holes are misaligned by 8 millimeters. Without a perfect match, the drive shaft will shear in the first second of operation. Levchenko clamps the German cast iron into a bench vise. He grabs a heavy, manual mechanical drill. He braces the smooth wooden stock of the tool against his own sunken chest. The alloy steel bit touches the porous surface. The mechanic begins to crank the handle rapidly. The metal squeals unpleasantly. No chips come off. The high-quality cast iron resists. Outside the base, a twin anti-aircraft mount thunders in long bursts. Enemy infantry has breached the second line of defense. The engagement distance has closed to 900 meters. Levchenko presses his chest harder against the drill. The skin under his sweat-soaked tunic is chafed raw and bloody from the constant, hard friction. The tool's RPMs climb. Incredibly sharp iron chips fly directly into his face. They bite into his cheeks like tiny needles. A stinging bead of sweat floods his left eye. The sergeant doesn't blink. He cranks the handle continuously. The iron heats up rapidly. Thick smoke rises from the contact point. Cutting fluid had run dry long ago. Levchenko spits on the red-hot drill bit. The saliva boils instantly with a loud hiss. A sharp crack. The drill suddenly lurches forward. Levchenko slams his chest into the steel vise with full force. The air is driven from his lungs. The drill bit shatters into 3 jagged shards. The brittle, case-hardened steel couldn't withstand the slightest axial misalignment. A large shard gouges deep into the sergeant's right palm. Fresh blood pours over the German part. It mixes instantly with the steel dust, turning into a grimy, abrasive paste. Levchenko silently yanks the piece of torn metal from his shredded flesh. He quickly wipes his mangled hand on his padded trousers. He clamps a new bit into the chuck. He resumes the relentless grind. The pace of work intensifies. The pain recedes completely into the background. Only raw mechanics remain. 1 hole drilled. 2nd hole. 3rd. After 40 minutes of grueling labor, the basket is ready. Levchenko grabs the modified unit with bloody hands. His own blood provides a dangerous lubricant where a rigid seat is required. He jumps clumsily into the incredibly cramped engine compartment. He guides the steel disc directly between the engine's output shaft and the tank's gearbox. There is no clearance at all. His fingers are pinned between 2 pieces of cold, dead iron. "Give me the bolts," the mechanic rasps. There is no answer. Outside the bay, the dull thud of a falling human body rings out. The clatter of heavy army boots on the hangar's broken concrete follows. A long shadow instantly blocks the light from the only surviving lamp. An NKVD duty lieutenant peers into the open turret hatch.
The officer holds a pair of service-issue Tokarevs firmly in both hands. The hammers are already cocked. Behind the special officer's back stand two tall soldiers from a barrier detachment. They hold blued steel submachine guns. "Drop the tool." The lieutenant's voice is devoid of emotion. A dry, lethal statement of fact. "Hands on the armor." Levchenko continues to hold the clutch basket. The heavy unit hangs solely on his torn, bloody fingers. If he lets go, the cast iron will crash down. The impact will inevitably shatter the aluminum crankcase and destroy the machine's last chance of moving forever. "Go to hell," Levchenko growls. "Tighten the mounting nut. The shaft alignment will shift." The lieutenant leaps onto the tank's armor in a single bound. A heavy, hobnailed boot slams into the sergeant's face. The mechanic's head snaps back. The back of his skull cracks against the hard edge of the steel hatch. Hot blood from his broken nose floods his lips. Levchenko takes the blow. He does not let go of the vital part. His muscles turn to stone from the inhuman strain. Two armed soldiers jump directly into the engine compartment. The cramped space instantly turns into a bloody scuffle. Wooden stocks slam hard into the mechanic's ribs. Levchenko is forcibly pinned against the cold, ribbed metal of the firewall. "Hold the guide shaft!" the mechanic screams frantically, spitting a broken tooth onto the cast iron. A soldier strikes the sergeant's right hand with the butt of his submachine gun. A spasm racks his muscles. His fingers release reflexively. The clutch basket falls onto the shaft tail. By some miracle, the disc seats perfectly onto the mechanism's guide splines. A loud metallic clang rings out. The locking pin snaps shut. The impossible union has been forged in the face of the violence. The NKVD officer presses the pistol barrel hard against Levchenko's pulsing temple. "In the name of the law of the Republic, for armed sabotage," the lieutenant intones. His index finger tightens on the trigger. The ground suddenly drops away. A direct hit from a German 105mm howitzer shell completely obliterates a load-bearing concrete column of the hangar. Massive ceiling slabs collapse onto the floor with a primal roar 30 feet from the tank. A monstrous shockwave instantly knocks everyone off their feet. The lieutenant's pistol misfires from the accidental impact against the steel edge of the turret. The bullet whistles into the ruined ceiling. Thick brick dust chokes their lungs. A continuous tinnitus rings in their ears. Levchenko is the first to come to. He lies on the cold, filthy metal. His left hand instinctively finds a massive wrench. The NKVD officer shakes his head desperately, trying to pick up his dropped weapon. Levchenko swings the heavy wrench, slamming it into the lieutenant's wrist. A sharp crack of breaking bone. The pistol falls to the ribbed floor of the compartment. The sergeant throws his full weight onto the wounded officer. He pins the man's throat hard against the sharp edge of the cut armor with his grimy forearm. "The shells are exploding, Lieutenant!" Levchenko rasps directly into the Chekist's distorted face. "The tribunal is off. The shaft is seated. I need to turn it over, now!" The barrier detachment soldiers scramble up and snap their submachine guns to their shoulders. The steel bolts cycle in unison. Death stands on both sides. From the black muzzles of Soviet submachine guns inside, and from the long barrels of German tanks already smashing through the base's outer steel gates outside. Levchenko does not remove his tensed arm from the choking lieutenant's throat. The mechanic's gaze is heavier than cast iron. Blood drips from his shattered chin directly onto the officer's clean tunic. "Shoot," Levchenko whispers to the soldiers, barely audible. "And you'll all rot here with this tank in 3 minutes." State Security Captain Elizarov, strides heavily through the broken brick and twisted metal. Dust settles in a thick layer on his dark blue collar tabs. The duty lieutenant wheezes on the oil-slicked floor, clutching his broken wrist. The barrier detachment soldiers hesitantly lower their submachine guns under the icy, crushing gaze of their commander. Elizarov pulls a clean paper interrogation form from his map case. The yellow paper crinkles dryly.
This bureaucratic sound seems utterly surreal against the primal roar of the base being destroyed. Article 58 demands strict adherence to procedural norms. Even on the very edge of a mass grave, the state system requires properly executed paperwork. Levchenko leans heavily against the cold, ribbed armor of the mangled tank. His broken right leg is twisted unnaturally and hangs limp. The mechanic's face has become a solid black and red mask of ingrained soot and fresh blood. He breathes in gasps. Air passes through his broken teeth with a wet, wheezing whistle. "Give me the names of all accomplices in this sabotage, Sergeant." Elizarov's voice is steady, devoid of a single emotion. The metal of the relentless protocol grinds against the metal of the encroaching war. Who exactly gave the criminal order to destroy the load-bearing structure of a combat vehicle? The first 81mm fragmentation mortar shell punches through the remains of the hangar's glass roof with a piercing howl. The explosion shreds an empty artillery shell rack into fine gray dust. Hot shrapnel screams as it peppers the concrete walls. Elizarov doesn't even flinch. His fountain pen hovers over the paper form. The 4th Tank Brigade is heading straight into a tactical kill zone. Levchenko spits a thick glob of blood directly onto the Chekist's chrome leather boot. The standard 71 TK radio is completely smashed. Communication range is absolute zero. An hour ago, the Germans deployed camouflaged anti-tank batteries behind the nameless ridge. 30 heavy guns. The brigade will march straight into that ambush in exactly 40 minutes. They'll burn in 3 minutes. Every last one of them. A second enemy mortar shell lands significantly closer. A piece of shrapnel the size of a man's palm rips through the tank's side plating with a horrific screech, just 4 inches from the sergeant's head. A shower of yellow sparks hits the mechanic's eyes. Levchenko doesn't look away. That is none of your concern. Your concern is to answer the investigator's questions clearly. State the motive for the crime. Elizarov methodically fills in the columns of the protocol. The bureaucratic engine of death has no reverse gear. Outside, a low vibrating roar builds continuously. German self-propelled artillery shifts its concentrated fire directly onto the repair base. The thick walls of the hangar shudder from a series of massive explosions. The reinforced concrete cracks piteously. Heavy chunks of rusted rebar fall from the high ceiling. One of them skewers a young barrier detachment soldier through the chest. The man drops dead onto the concrete without a sound. Death makes its own harsh corrections to the course of the investigation. Levchenko lunges away from the armor. He takes a desperate step forward on his one good leg. He grabs the captain by the collar of his perfectly clean wool greatcoat with filthy, blood-slicked hands. He leaves black, oily smears on the fabric. "The motive is to survive and destroy the enemy," the mechanic bellows. His voice breaks into a hoarse, primal roar. It completely drowns out the deafening roar of the exploding shells. The factory gasoline engine gave a pathetic 400 horsepower. Top speed on a flat road, 86 kilometers an hour. In this god-forsaken black earth, our machine is a stationary steel coffin. We just installed 1,600 horses. She'll move through the mud like an express train. The weight has gone up to 15 tons. The center of gravity is shifted.
But only this bastard machine will intercept the column in time to mask the line of fire. Elizarov strikes Levchenko hard on the forearms. He breaks free from the iron grip. He instantly draws his service pistol. The blued steel of the weapon is once again aimed directly at the mechanic's face. You have finally lost your mind from fear. A massive aviation engine will shred a light tank transmission the first time you dump the clutch.
The tank will burn instantly, right here in these ruined gates. You are just cowardly attempting to delay your execution. Levchenko laughs, a horrific hacking sound. The laugh sounds more like the wet cough of a tubercular patient. Fresh blood flows down his chin onto the collar of his tunic. The drive shaft is welded solid. I personally installed a salvaged German clutch. We tore out every factory governor by the roots. She won't burn until I've squeezed every last drop out of her myself. Put the gun away, Captain. You don't have a choice anymore. Without me, you'll never start this iron bitch. And without this tank, the entire 4th Brigade will be turned into charred ash. You'll face a military tribunal yourself for the loss of personnel. The system will consume you as ruthlessly as it will me. Another heavy shell hits the concrete base of the gates. The massive steel doors are torn from their heavy hinges with a deafening screech. They collapse into the hangar, crushing machinery. A thick pillar of acrid gray smoke and the sickly sweet smell of burnt TNT rushes into the breach. Through the dense smoke, the yellow flashes of German rifle shots are clearly visible. Enemy infantry was within bayonet range. Levchenko turns away from the pistol pointed at his face. He limps heavily toward the open driver's hatch. With immense effort, he squeezes into the incredibly cramped space, reeking of stale blood and spilled diesel. He reaches for the toggle switches with wet fingers. Elizarov stares for a long time at the empty, unfinished interrogation form. Then, he shifts his gaze to the gray line of German infantry advancing through the breach. The iron logic of the military code shattered against the cast-iron reality of a lost battle. The protocol instantly loses all meaning when there is no one left to carry out the death sentence. The captain slowly, with visible reluctance, lowered his weapon. A dry, short click of the safety is heard. The pistol returns to its leather holster. The state security captain violently rips the interrogation form in half. He tosses the scraps directly into a black puddle of motor oil. He strides quickly to the tank's frontal armor. "If that engine stalls, I'll shoot you through the bulkhead myself," Elizarov intones. His voice completely loses its bureaucratic chill. In its place is the raspy, naked fury of a man backed into a corner. "Get in the turret, NKVD!" Levchenko screams from the pitch darkness of the steel womb. "You can point the way to the tribunal." Elizarov plants a hobnailed boot on a road wheel. He pulls himself up with strong arms. He dives into the cold, dark hole of the turret. Inside, it smells unbearably of the previous crew's death. The captain takes the commander's seat. He braces his feet hard against the ribbed floor. He grips the twin handles of the turret machine gun with a death grip. Outside, hell breaks loose. German mortar teams blanket the hangar area with rapid, devastating fire. Every lost second of delay means guaranteed death. Levchenko places his bloody hands on the steel control levers. The ignition lock was ripped out long ago. Only bare copper wires protrude from the smashed instrument panel. The mechanic gnaws the insulation off with his teeth. He spits the bitter rubber onto the metal floor. "Ground the panel!" The mechanic screams at the top of his lungs, drowning out the howl of falling shells. Elizarov fumbles for the massive ebonite master switch on the distribution board. He slams it with his fist. The contact closes hard. Levchenko brings the bare wires together. The surviving warning lights flicker dimly. Electrical voltage is fed to the starter. The silence before the storm presses monstrously against their eardrums. The sergeant holds his breath. His fingers squeeze the improvised contact. A hot spark stings his hands. The electric current surges into the depths of the massive aviation engine. The countdown for the final seconds of the Frankenstein and the men within begins. There is no air in the compartment, reeking of ozone and spilled diesel. Sergeant Levchenko mashes the bare wire ends into the broken contacts. The starter emits a strained, death-rattle wail. Electric current surges into the 12 monstrous cylinders of the Mikulin aviation engine. A second of absolute silence. The metal shudders. The fuel mixture detonates. The AM-38 engine explodes into life with a muffled, primal roar. Meter-long tongues of blue flame blast from the stubby exhaust ports with a deafening crackle. Red-hot gases instantly fill the cramped space of the fighting compartment. The internal shockwave hurled Captain Elizarov against the steel breech of the 45mm gun. The officer falls to his knees. He is completely deafened by the unthinkable roar. This is not the sound of a standard tank diesel. This is the roar of a crashing Sturmovik trapped in a steel coffin. The vibration instantly blows out the remains of the glass vision blocks in the viewing slits. The BT-7 tank begins to thrash in a violent mechanical fever. A ton of foreign metal fought to break free. The aviation unit is destroying the fragile makeshift mounts. Bolts scream under the incredible pressure. Levchenko's fingers turn white as he grips the iron levers of the steering clutches. His left foot settles onto the stiff clutch pedal. Beneath his grimy sole is the captured German basket. The standard tank gearbox is rated for exactly 400 horsepower. Now, 1,600 are about to slam into it. The laws of engineering guarantee an instant shattering of the steel gears. The mechanic rasps, shouting over the engine's howl. He snaps the pedal back. A mechanical impact of titanic force jolts the armored hull. The clang of tearing metal slams against their bleeding eardrums. By some miracle, the driveshaft withstood the initial kinetic surge. The steel teeth bite into each other with a death grip. The tracks spin on the oil-slicked concrete with a piercing shriek. A shower of yellow sparks and sharp concrete chips fly from beneath the metal treads. The tank doesn't just move. The tank makes an uncontrolled leap. 15 tons of Soviet steel lunge forward with the grace of a cornered predator. The massive torque pinned Levchenko into his seat. His broken right leg explodes with a new flash of sharp, paralyzing pain. Shattered bones grind harshly against one another. The sergeant spits thick blood directly onto the bored-out instrument panel. The machine flies toward the closed steel gates of the hangar. The distance vanishes in a single second. It's too late to brake. The brakes had been stripped as dead weight. The impact was total. The thick frontal armor crumples the heavy metal doors like wet paper. The screech of tearing corrugated iron is drowned out by the roar of the straining aviation giant. The brickwork shatters into grey dust. The tank carries the entire gate out with it. The hull rips the massive steel hinges out, along with chunks of rusted rebar. Cold daylight hits their inflamed eyes through a thick cloud of cement dust. The overhang above the gates collapses. A concrete beam weighing 3 tons falls onto the engine compartment. The modified armor plate withstands the crushing blow. The tank bursts out into the open. Outside are the lead elements of the advancing German infantry. The enemy has reached within 20 meters of the ruined building. Wehrmacht soldiers in field grey greatcoats froze. Out of the impenetrable dust cloud, an iron monster lunges at them.
its rear end bloated and scorched by the torch. The engine spews blue flame and dense clouds of black smoke. Levchenko does not change course. He steers the multi-ton war machine directly into the center of the dense infantry formation. The right track crushes the lead squad with a wet crunch. The treads crushed an MG-34 and its gunner into the dirt.
Human bones snap under the iron links with a sickening sound. Bloody mud spatters the sloped frontal armor. Tatters of flesh fouled the drive sprockets. "Fire!" Levchenko screams into the empty intercom tube. There is no internal communication. He slams his grimy fist against the iron roof of the fighting compartment. Elizarov comes to from the hard impact against the breach. The officer struggles up from the oil-slicked floor of the turret. Survival instinct overrode every line of the regulations. The captain grips the handles of the coaxial Degtyaryov machine gun. His index finger mashes the stiff trigger all the way back. A long, continuous burst stitches through a dense group of enemy soldiers. Lead shredded human forms. The dead fall. The wounded scream desperately. They try to crawl away from the roaring tracks. The tank crushes them without the slightest reduction in speed. The turret traverses in sharp jerks. Elizarov stomps on the foot trigger of the main gun. The blast of a high-explosive shell slams against their ears. The lethal charge detonates in the thick of the retreating German infantry. The earth churned with blood and slush. The enemy shakes off their initial shock. Heavy return fire erupts. Armor-piercing rounds clang against the rotating turret. A German infantryman levels a heavy anti-tank rifle. The range closes to 10 meters. A shot rings out. The heavy tungsten slug slams into the sloped glacis plate. The thin Soviet armor holds against the glancing blow. A ricochet screams off into the gray autumn sky. Inside the cramped cabin, a jagged shard of metal spalls off the armor. The steel splinter whistles past Levchenko's temple by a hair's breadth, carving a deep, bleeding furrow across the sergeant's cheekbone. Blood floods his left eye. The driver wastes no time on the wound. He yanks the right steering lever back. The tank pivots sharply, unnaturally fast on the sodden Moscow topsoil. Thick mud fountains from beneath the tracks. The raw power of the transplanted engine completely ignores the resistance of the viscous ground. The earth can no longer hold the machine. The motor roars at its red line. The mechanical needle of the tachometer bounces past the red zone. Levchenko shifts gears blindly. The gearbox lets out a death rattle. The metal screeches, but accepts the surging torque. The machine's speed climbs rapidly, 30 kilometers per hour across the deeply plowed field. 40, 50. A symbiosis of steel and desperation breaks out of the kill zone of the ruined repair base. Ahead lie long kilometers of dangerous no-man's land. Ahead lies the only chance to save the tank column. Vibration inside the hull reaches a critical point. Steel rivets begin to pop out of the armor plates, whistling like rapid pistol shots. The temperature in the open engine compartment rises exponentially. The stock cooling system is utterly failing to handle the heat output of the overworked aviation beast. Levchenko glances at the shattered temperature gauge. Components are beginning to melt. The engine is slowly devouring itself to maintain this unthinkable dash. The sergeant mashes the gas pedal to the floor. There is nowhere left to retreat. Death is hot on their heels. The step turns into a washboard. The BT-7's hull slams and bounces off the frozen mounds. 15 tons of mangled metal fly across the Moscow wilderness. The Christie suspension screams under the extreme load. The factory springs compress to their limit, steel coils clanging against each other. The chassis was never designed for 1,600 horsepower.
The Mikulin aircraft engine ruthlessly tears at the light tank frame. The tracks kick sparks out of the frozen earth. A solid stream of mud coats the frontal armor. There are no wipers. The vision slits are instantly clogged with greasy filth. Sergeant Levchenko is driving completely blind. German artillery opens up with heavy suppressive fire.
A battery of heavy howitzers tries to bracket the lone, unnaturally fast target. The first shell lands 50 meters off the starboard side. The earth rises in a solid black wall. The shockwave slams into the steel flank with colossal force. The multi-ton machine is jerked violently to the left. The right track slips into a deep trench. Levchenko white-knuckles the left steering lever until his joints pop. He levels the course. The engine chokes on its own roar, but drags the tank out of the skid. A second explosion plows the earth directly in their path. Shrapnel hammers the glacis plate like heavy buckshot. The metal rings. Ricochets whistle into the gray sky. Inside the turret, it is a physical hell. State Security Captain Elizarov has completely lost his bearings in the confined space. The harsh, high-frequency vibration methodically grinds his bones. The lack of proper shock absorption turns every bump into a ruthless sledgehammer blow to the spine. The Osobist clings with white-knuckled fingers to the cold handrails of the commander's cupola. He is tossed from wall to wall. His pristine wool greatcoat is soaked in acrid sweat and spilled motor oil. The steel breech of the main gun strikes his ribs with a backhand blow. His breath is ragged. His stomach cramps from the constant, unbearable jolting. The execution warrant was left to rot in a puddle. The system means nothing now. There is only roaring metal and the primal fear of death. The machine begins to rapidly devour itself. The temperature in the engine compartment exceeds every conceivable limit. The makeshift cooling system fails completely. The water in the radiators boils off instantly with a piercing hiss. The red-hot cast-iron manifold ignites the old insulation. The rubber casing on the electrical wires begins to melt. Thick, incredibly acrid black smoke seeps into the fighting compartment through the gaps of the torch-cut armor. There is no ventilation. Oxygen is burning up fast. The cabin turns into a suffocating gas chamber. The smoke stings their eyes until they bleed. The paint on the interior walls begins to bubble and peel away in toxic scabs. Levchenko is suffocating. He rips a filthy, oil-stained rag from his neck and presses the coarse fabric to his battered face. He breathes through it, but the filter isn't working. Toxic carbon monoxide penetrates deep into his lungs. The sergeant breaks into a heavy, hacking cough. Thick red droplets splatter onto the bored-out instrument panel. Blood from ruptured capillaries mixes with black soot. His right leg has become a single, pulsing mass of agony. A shattered bone tears at inflamed flesh every time he engages the captured clutch. The rubber soles of his combat boots are fusing to the red-hot steel pedals. He mashes the gas again. The RPMs climb uncontrollably. The mechanical needle of the tachometer jams in the red zone and snaps with a crunch. The tank leaps over a dried-up creek. The impact against the rocky opposite bank shakes the hull to its core. The left front balance spring snaps. The cannon-shot crack of breaking alloy steel rings out. The tank's nose dips sharply. The idler wheel screeches against the armor plate. The tracks begin to sag dangerously. To slow down means immediate death from the closing artillery fire. Levchenko completely ignores the critical failure of the running gear. He holds the steel levers in a death grip. Fire spreads to the remnants of the ammunition in the bustle rack. The brass casings are reaching critical temperatures. A thermal detonation of the propellant could happen at any second. Elizarov collapses onto the oil-slicked floor of the turret. He tries to suck in a bit of oxygen near the metal floorboards. The state security captain desperately hammers the handle of his service pistol against the armored back of the driver's seat. This isn't a commander's stern order. It is the instinctive plea for help from a suffocating man. Levchenko pays no mind to the dull thudding. He has finally transformed into a biological appendage of the roaring motor. Man and machine have merged into a single, disintegrating mechanism. This mechanism is programmed for one thing: forward motion. Physical pain numbs. Fear burns out in the flames of the failing engine. All that remains is an absolute, manic concentration on the invisible trajectory. Through the thick smoke and the layer of filth on the shattered vision block, Levchenko discerns the dark outlines of the forest. That is where the ambush is. That is where the German anti-tank guns are coolly waiting for the Soviet marching column. A 150mm high-explosive shell lands exactly 10 meters behind the flying machine. A colossal blast wave gives the multi-ton tank an additional, unnatural surge of speed. The rear bursts into bright, open flame. The BT-7 has finally become a flaming meteor. The captured transmission lets out a piercing death howl. The teeth of the main gears crumble into fine steel dust. The metallic screeching drowns out even the thunder of the artillery bursts. Levchenko physically feels the machine dying right under his hands. The massive aircraft engine is running on pure self-destruction. Heavy pistons punch through thin valves. Boiling oil fountains from the sheared exhaust pipes. Stopping is inevitable. The only question is the distance covered toward the enemy positions. The sergeant squeezes the last drops of power from the agonizing motor. The gap narrows. The burning hunk of steel tears through space, leaving a trail of oily ash in its wake. Ahead, on the battered dirt road, the marching column of the 4th Tank Brigade moves along. The heavy machines rhythmically grind the damp Moscow earth. The crews are completely relaxed, outside the zone of visible contact. Marching order. Hatches open. Commanders sit on the armor, smoking. They are absolutely blind. Radio contact is dead. The road slopes gently into a deep hollow, surrounded by thick autumn spruce. Death is camouflaged in the spruce. 30 German anti-tank guns. Barrels of cold steel are tightly covered with branches and camo netting. The gunners have long since centered their optical sights on the kill zones. The crews are frozen. Breaches are locked. Armor-piercing shells sit in the chambers. The guns wait for the optimal range. A perfect fire trap. The 100% destruction of the Soviet column has been calculated with mathematical precision. Only a few meters remain before the lead vehicle enters the guaranteed kill zone. Levchenko sees the layout of forces through the shattered, blood and mud-streaked vision block. He flies across their path, straight through the plowed field. Inside the fighting compartment, the temperature hits 115 degrees. The heat melts the wire insulation. The paint on the interior walls of the hull breaks into massive bubbles and pops. Toxic white smoke eats at his eyes. There is nothing to breathe. The oxygen has been completely consumed in the maw of the overheated motor. The driver's heart beats with the frequency of a machine gun burst. His pulse threatens to burst his temporal veins. The aircraft engine breaks into a death shriek. The sound shifts into high-frequency ultrasound. The metal screams in pain. Levchenko mashes the right gas pedal all the way into the ribbed floor. The sole of his boot has fused to the red-hot iron.
He physically feels the last connections inside the assembly snapping.
Hold on, Nosobist!
The driver rasps, spitting a glob of black blood onto the dashboard.
Hit the center!
Captain Elizarov bellows, clutching the turret handrails for dear life. The catastrophe inside the motor happens in a fraction of a second. The lubrication boils off completely. Friction obliterates the piston rings. The piston of the sixth cylinder seizes solid from the monstrous thermal expansion.
The crankshaft continues to spin at high speed due to inertia. A snapped alloy connecting rod punches through the thick aluminum engine block from the inside. A chunk of white-hot metal the size of a fist flies out, piercing the thin internal armored bulkhead. A fountain of boiling motor oil sprays in every direction. The fluid instantly ignites upon contact with the glowing exhaust manifold. The tank's rear explodes in bright orange flames. Fire immediately engulfs the entire engine compartment. A massive hydraulic shock snaps the driveshaft in two. The transmission shatters into small fragments. Gear teeth clang against the armor from the inside, piercing the fuel tanks. There is no more thrust. The engine is dead. All that remains is the unguided kinetic energy of 15 tons of burning metal. The left track cannot withstand the thermal shock. A steel guide pin snaps. The steel ribbon flies off the road wheels with a wild screech. The tracks unfurl across the ground like a lethal iron whip, scything through small bushes. The tank instantly loses steering. The massive speed and the loss of the left support throw the blazing machine into a violent, uncontrolled skid. The tank goes into a broadside slide. The burning BT-7 skids sideways through the sodden mud, right between the camouflaged German positions and the 4th Brigade's column. Mud sprays in a fan from beneath the bare wheels. The friction of metal against stone kicks up showers of sparks. The machine turns into a massive, unstoppable, flaming shield. The German battery commander barks the order to open fire. The artillerymen's nerves snap under the tension. The ambush is exposed. The plan is ruined. The guns fire in a volley. The first armor-piercing shell slams directly into the right side of the broad-sliding tank. A monstrous kinetic impact shakes the machine. The armor is breached. A spray of white-hot fragments explodes inside the cabin. Levchenko takes a hit to his left shoulder. The bone is pulverized. Pain paralyzes half his body. He collapses chest first under the steel steering levers. A second shell shears off the turret. The weld of the turret ring snaps. The multi-ton structure shifts backward with a cannon blast roar. Elizarov is hurled onto the ribbed floor. The captain screams in agony from the savage pain. A shard of metal severs 2 fingers on his right hand. Blood sprays in a pulsing jet onto the red-hot metal. A third 75mm shell hits the burning engine compartment dead on. The remnants of the aircraft engine are reduced to dust. A massive internal explosion tosses the tank's rear high into the air. The blazing machine flips. The multi-ton hull crushes the frozen earth. The mangled hunk of steel, engulfed in roaring flames, plows into the ground with a deafening screech, right on the German battery's line of fire. The burning wreck completely blocks the sector of fire. It absorbs the full, lethal fury of the German guns. Solid shot methodically hammers the dead Soviet armor. The metal bends, tears, and melts, but physically prevents death from reaching the marching column. The commanders of the 4th Brigade react instantly to the sudden battle ahead. The tanks veer sharply off the road. Turrets traverse heavily toward the artillery flashes. The ambush is spotted. The Soviet tank guns open up with heavy return fire on the identified enemy positions. High explosive shells tear the German lines to pieces. The trap is broken.
Inside the overturned, blazing steel coffin, time has no meaning. The temperature climbs rapidly toward a critical point. Fire crawls toward the remaining ammunition in the fighting compartment. The air has turned into a lung-searing plasma. Levchenko lies on the blood-slicked ceiling of the cabin. His right arm is broken. His left shoulder is pierced. His leg is shattered. His face is a solid crimson mask.
He hears the heavy Soviet shells exploding outside, methodically suppressing the German guns. The objective has been achieved. The driver draws in the searing air with a ragged, heavy gasp. He searches for the Osobist through the thick smoke. "Captain!" Levchenko chokes on blood. "Captain, get out! We're leaving!" There is no answer, only the steady, predatory crackle of the flames devouring the metal. The fire closes in around them in a dense, impenetrable ring. Shells from the 4th Tank Brigade tear the autumn forest to shreds. The fire ambush is completely exposed. The German artillerymen made a fatal mistake. They gave away their exact coordinates with that first premature volley at the flying, burning target. 30 camouflaged guns received an immediate, lethal counterstrike. Heavy Soviet Kliment Voroshilov tanks and the new T-34 mediums fire point-blank without a moment's pause. 76mm high-explosive rounds grind the German PaK-38 anti-tank guns and their crews into a bloody pulp. Red-hot shrapnel tears through human flesh. Blast waves level log fortifications. Trees snap and fall, sheared by heavy canister shot. The frozen earth is on fire. The perfectly planned tactical trap ceased to exist in a matter of minutes. The steel avalanche of the Soviet marching column halts at a safe distance. The drivers kill their overheated diesel engines. Turret gunners methodically finish off the surviving enemy soldiers with short, aimed machine gun bursts. Optics scan for living targets among the burning gun carriages. The battle lasts exactly 7 minutes. Then, absolute silence. This silence is far more deafening than the continuous artillery barrage. It presses against ruptured eardrums like a heavy lead weight. Through the ringing of a severe concussion, only the steady, monotonous ticking of cooling, mangled metal breaks through. The overturned BT-7 lies in the middle of a field scarred by fresh craters. The machine is stone dead. The rear of the armored hull has turned into a shapeless lump of melted steel slag. The aviation unit has completely burned out from the inside. The engine gave its last spark of monstrous power to close the line of fire. All mechanical energy was consumed in one final, suicidal dash. The bottom escape hatch falls away into the liquid mud with a screech. The thick steel hinges were sheared off by the internal detonation of the ammo rack. Through the narrow gap between the red-hot armor and the cold earth, a blood-stained human hand reaches out. Sergeant Levchenko crawls out with agonizing effort. His left shoulder is pierced by a large, jagged shard of the glacis armor. Dark, thick blood heavily soaks his torn sleeve. His right leg drags behind him like dead weight, carving a deep furrow in the ground. The driver's face is one solid crimson burn from the boiling motor oil. His canvas army tunic smolders across his broad back. The sergeant claws at the frozen clumps of Moscow topsoil with his good hand. With powerful, desperate lunges, he drags his mangled body forward. He gasps for air, coughing up thick black soot mixed with pink froth. He crawls 2 meters away from the burning hull and turns back sharply. Levchenko digs his gnarled, filthy fingers into the stiff collar of someone else's commander's greatcoat. He grinds his teeth until they nearly crack and drags the state security captain out with him.
Elizarov is alive. The dazed osobist tumbles heavily from the smoking womb of the wrecked tank directly into an icy autumn puddle. The filthy water hisses loudly as it hits his scorching wool clothes. The captain sucks in air with a ragged, whistling sound. His right hand is crudely wrapped in a filthy scrap from an individual first aid kit. His index and middle fingers are gone. The jagged edges of the horrific wound pulse rapidly. Fresh arterial blood pumps through the soaked gauze bandage. They both lie in the cold, sticky mud 10 meters from the completely destroyed war machine. Two men who miraculously survived a direct, concentrated barrage from 30 German artillery pieces. Levchenko rolls onto his back. He stares straight up into the low, gray sky, thick with gunpowder smoke. Cold, driving rain beats mercilessly against his burned face. Physical pain loses all meaning. The engineering task has been fully completed. The tracks are intact, the tank brigade is saved, and the enemy battery has been wiped out. "Carry out the sentence, Captain," the driver rasps. His voice sounds like the harsh scrape of a rusty file against dead iron. "Article 58. Intentional damage to military equipment. Your tank is gone. The material damage is obvious." Elizarov sits up with immense effort. He braces his healthy left hand against the wet, trembling earth. For a long time, he stares with absolute focus at the smoking, charred wreck. Then he turns a heavy, hollow gaze toward the broken Levchenko. No flowery words of gratitude, no empty talk of redeeming guilt with blood. The officer silently reaches into the inner pocket of his torn, scorched greatcoat. His fingers find a folded sheet of yellowed office paper. The denunciation. The official, approved death warrant. The document is heavily stained with human blood and black motor oil, but the battalion commander's blue ink stamp is still perfectly clear. The osobist pulls a crumpled Biol-Morkanal cigarette from his side pocket. He clamps the dirty cardboard filter between his battered, bloody lips. He has no matches. Elizarov struggles to his feet. He sways violently from the acute lack of oxygen and massive blood loss. Slowly, dragging his left leg, he approaches the blazing tank. The intense infrared heat beats against his pale face. The captain firmly presses the official death warrant directly against the white-hot exhaust manifold of the dead aircraft engine. The yellow paper blackens instantly. It curls into a ring. It flares up in a bright, clean yellow flame. Elizarov carefully brings the burning sentence to his face. He takes a deep, greedy drag of the cigarette. The acrid tobacco smoke mixes with the thick smell of scorched flesh and burning cellulose. He carelessly tosses the remains of the smoldering paper under his feet, directly into the puddle. He grinds the gray ash into the mud with his heavy, hobnailed boot. The document has ceased to exist. The punitive state machine suffered a conscious failure on this specific square meter of the frozen front. Levchenko slowly closes his eyes. He clearly hears the rhythmic creak of the leaf springs from the approaching medical wagons of the 4th Tank Brigade, the loud clatter of Soviet recovery tractors, the shouts of the medics. Living men have come to collect the survivors of the fight. But it no longer matters at all. The sergeant's personal race against time is over. The Great War is only beginning, and it demands new sacrifices. There will be new ruthless orders from command. There will be new imperfect war machines. There will be new senseless deaths and new impossible engineering tasks. The wreck of the burned-out BT-7 remained forever in the cold Moscow mud. The jagged alloy metal of the armored hull was quickly covered in a thick layer of reddish-brown rust. The steel tracks, torn out by the internal explosion, grew permanently into the autumn topsoil. The heavy aircraft cylinder block fused forever with the shattered tank transmission into a single, hideous, inseparable monolith. This massive, mangled hunk of dead iron was never cleared from the battlefield. It was left to rust and rot under the driving autumn rains and the heavy winter snows of 1941. An utterly silent monument to human madness, the brutal necessity of the front, and a soldier's duty fulfilled.